Hi, I'm Ken Gale. I do an environmental radio show on WBAI, so I have a decidedly environmental aspect to when I talk about TPP, but I'll talk about all of it. How many people are familiar with TPP in any kind of detail at all? Besides the people who I know well. Not everybody.
Not a detail.
Not everybody. Okay. The TPP epitomizes everything that any activist has been working on, for whether you've been working on it for days or years. It goes against all of it. It will get rid of clean air laws. It'll get rid of clean water laws. It'll get rid of union rights. It'll get rid of indigenous rights. It'll get rid of banking reforms. It'll get rid of internet freedom. It'll get rid of generic drugs. It'll get rid of an immense amount of democratic freedoms that we take for granted, even under the present system. I am really glad Move On is doing this because the Obama administration wants it. And I think that when the Obama administration does things that are wrong, we should let them know. And this couldn't be more wrong. The Nation magazine called it NAFTA on steroids because it's way worse than NAFTA, but does a lot of the same things. NAFTA has gotten rid of anywhere between 1 and 5 million jobs, depending on whose research you look at. Some of the things NAFTA has done to us. A company sued Quebec for a fracking ban because it would impede on their future profits. Dolack safe tuna labels. A Mexican company got rid of those under NAFTA. To me, the worst part, again, environmental orientation. A mining company called Pacific Rim wanted to make a gold mine in the mountains of El Salvador. They used cyanide to mine gold. That gold mine would have poisoned the water supply of half the population of El Salvador. The government of El Salvador said, no, you can't do that. And Pacific Rim sued the nation of El Salvador under NAFTA for future lost profits. And of course, they get to decide how much those profits will be. They also bring it to an international tribunal. This is not a local court we're talking about. This is a small group of people who were picked by industry to sit on cases like this. So that's what NAFTA does. NAFTA took some of the parts of WTO that was so egregious that you had thousands of people marching in the street and make them worse. And two years ago, there are 3 free trade agreements. They call them free trade agreements, but they're none of the above. There's one for Colombia, one for South Korea, and Peru. And there was hardly any activism against those free trade agreements. And so industry has said, hey, nobody's watching us. We can do whatever the hell we want. So they've got the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It started out with 9 countries, now there's 13?
I think there's 13.
13. They keep adding countries, but basically, it's not being written by people from the countries, it's being written by 600 corporate representatives. And they're writing it to protect corporations. This is now government by industry. The world government that the conservatives have been so scared about, Trans-Pacific Partnership is it. And another thing that this will ban is Buy American, because they will define American as any country that is signed on to TPP. So that means Vietnam will be Buy American because they're part of the TPP. See, slave labor the slave labor of China isn't slave labor enough for these companies. They want to bring it from the $1 a day in China to the 40 cents a day in Vietnam. This is anything they can think of to make things worse. Let's see, just right, clean water laws, clean air laws, anti-slavery laws, labor laws, banking reforms, the Endangered Species Act. Again, restraint for trade, you can't have an Endangered Species Act. Marine Mammals Protection Act, they'll get rid of that. Social justice laws, can't have social justice because that helps people. Organic food labeling, again, no organic food labeling, because the companies writing the Trans-Pacific Partnership are not organic food, they're big agribusiness. No GMO labeling. Monsanto was part of those 600 corporations. No GMO labeling. Just think of anything that any group you know of has been fighting for. The TPP is against it. And the main weapon for this, and you'll hear more about fast track from the other speakers, but the main weapon on this is getting the word out. Tell everybody you know. If you're part of a church, a community group, a school group, whatever, right? There are several people here who are very good speakers on the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Ask me, ask Kian, ask Pete, ask Adam. One of us will speak to your school, your church, anybody.
Absolutely.
This is an incredibly important issue. This is basically the democracy of the United States is at stake here. Our sovereignty is at stake here. The reason that nations are signing on to it is they're afraid of being marginalized in trade. Haiti is marginalized in world trade. Cuba is marginalized in world trade. So nations know what will happen if they displease these 600 corporations. So we have to let the governments of those nations know it's a whole lot worse for you if you pass this.
Can I ask just quickly, in your view, specific to New York or the New York, our New York City region, are there certain environmental concerns that are immediately, like the fracking thing, or they're immediately threatened? And I was reading something that, and it's not my expertise, the environmental, about the water, our New York City water. Maybe I'm confused.
The main thing,
in your opinion, that would be, threatened.
The main thing I'm worried about is a fracking ban. In fact, I will go so far as to say, now I'm going to talk about the WBAI, paranoid producer, but Cuomo wants fracking. He knows that the people of New York, for the most part, do not want fracking.
Right.
And I would not be a bit surprised if the Trans-Pacific Partnership was signed into law, that he allowed a fracking ban in New York State so that he could please the constituents in New York State, knowing that TPP would overturn any fracking ban, right? Any environmental law, any law. If you have laws favoring renewable energy over fossil fuel, well, the fossil fuel companies are writing TPP. So they go, oh, well, you can't have laws that promote renewable energy over fossil fuel. Because there aren't renewable energy companies writing TPP, there are fossil fuel companies. And, examples like that. Right now, New York State is part of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, so that there are less fossil fuels in New York State. It's a promotion of renewable energy, it's also a promotion of big hydro. But besides that, we know that renewable energy creates jobs, creates an enormous number of jobs over fossil fuel. It's also cleaner. So you do lose jobs in the healthcare industry when you have cleaner air and cleaner water. Although it is interesting that people in the healthcare industry don't mind losing those jobs because they know there's plenty of work for them. So you never hear people in the healthcare industry saying, dirty the water and the air because we'll lose our jobs. You'll hear the companies that make pharmaceuticals, they want to dirty the air and water because they know that they'll make a lot of money, and you're trying to take care of the symptoms of what the dirty air and water does to you. So I look at it from the dirty air, the dirty water, and clean energy.
Interesting.
Yeah?
Does this TPP agreement, does it also override previous WTO rules and regulations?
Oh yeah, because WTO, it was written by companies, but it didn't give them the power to sue governments. NAFTA gives them the power to sue governments. TPP gives companies the power to sue governments.
I'm Joe Lauria, as many of you know, from MoveOn.org. MoveOn.org is an organization that's dedicated to getting people more active in the democracy and taking on, it's not aligned necessarily with Democrats, although it appears that way a lot of the time because the Democrat has been the better choice than the Republican. But it's really about getting control of your elected representatives and holding them accountable. So I want to talk a little bit about, what's the first slide?
TPP.
All right, next one. The largest employer in the United States is Walmart. Let me put this to the side a little bit so they can. Is Walmart. Okay, I don't think
Oh, we're
that-
all supposed to be watching here? Oh, it's not.
Yeah, no, it's not going to be on
Oh.
there. Please watch the screen. So,
Can
it's-
everybody see the screen?
can you see it?
Yep. Oh.
Sorry.
Okay. I don't know if I'm in any place.
The largest employer in the United States is Walmart. And I don't think that's a surprise to anybody, right? They're really a vehicle for imported goods at very low prices. But before you switch, does anybody know who the second largest employer is in the United States?
U.S. government.
You would think, right? Anybody else? Okay, let me switch it. It's Kelly Temp Services. Kelly Temp Services. All right? And it just tells you a story about where we are as a nation, that a large part of our jobs are part-time and temporary. Now, unfortunately, I can't show you a clip that I wanted to show you, which actually preceded this, is of Ross Perot. In 1992, he was running against Bill Clinton, and President Bush, the senior, was there, and they were talking about the free trade agreement, NAFTA. And Clinton said it's going to be so good for America, and Bush agreed, and Perot was the only one who called a spade. He said, no, he said, if this is approved, whoosh, his famous whoosh statement, that's the sound of jobs leaving America, he said. And he said, you know, the countries, if you offer them companies, if you offer them labor costs at $1 an hour, and they're paying like $15 an hour here, it's no contest, they're going to move. And move they did. And he said, this trade agreement's hundreds and hundreds of pages, and I'm pretty smart. He said, but I don't understand all of it, so I asked one of the top experts. He said, how is this going to even out? How long will it take? And the expert said, well, about 15 years. All right? And what's going to happen is that the countries that are manufacturing now, eventually their wages are going to go up, like say $6 an hour, right? And eventually our wages will come down to $6 an hour. And then the drain is over. He said, but by that time our country is destroyed. Well, if you look at the statistics that Kelly Temp Services is the second largest employer in America, and Walmart isn't much better with the salaries they pay. There's a lot of temp jobs, part-time jobs. You see that we're really rapidly approaching that maybe that was a plan that somebody's implementing. So it's critical that we understand this. The average person, myself included, several months ago I couldn't tell you what the TPP was. I never heard of it. I never thought I needed to know about trade agreements. And the truth is, American citizens today all need to know, and all need to know they can make a difference in what their elected representatives do. Not alone, but acting in concert. MoveOn.org alone has 640,000 members in New York City. Now, they're not here, obviously, so they're not very active. Some of you, I'm sorry, excuse me. Michiko. And Tessa. But they're not all active, but we have to get people more involved. They're ready, they will do things periodically. And what we're trying to do, and especially with this movement, is bring people together, get these actions working, so that we can pressure our elected representatives. What's next?
Trade deficit.
Okay, what's our trade deficit with China? I looked it up for the last, since 2000. The agreement with China started in 2000. Cumulative, it's 2.7 trillion, not billions, $2.7 trillion that we paid out more than we got in, than they paid us for goods, right? Next.
And who is the number one factor in that? You already
And the number one factor
you
is...
just had it on your screen.
Is
just
the
before.
trade agreement.
No, Walmart.
Well, Walmart is a vehicle, but a lot of stores, you know, your little...
But Walmart sets the standard.
Walmart, Walmart is
They're the main
most
Oh, yeah.
responsible
That's what he said.
entity. If anyone who buys Walmart, you're doing everything you can to increase
Right.
that trade
And
deficit.
unfortunately, the truth is, any store you go to now has all these imported goods, because they can't compete otherwise. The companies that were selling American-made goods, out the window, they closed up.
But we need to be clear that China is not part of the TPP.
No, that's a
Yeah.
separate trade agreement. The bilateral trade agreements.
Right.
That one was initiated in 2000, and just in those years, we ran that deficit.
Right, no, I understand, yeah. But I mean, I just want people to understand that China's not part of the Trans-Pacific.
No, they're not.
Yeah, right now, but yeah, exactly.
Okay, so now with other countries, because of bilateral trade agreements and so forth, it's approximately $2.6 trillion in the deficit run up. So if you go to the next one, the total over 12 years is $5.4 trillion that we flew out of this country, okay? And it's not ending. It'd be different if it left and okay, now we got to make up for it. We're not doing anything, and our elected representatives have to let us know what's the plan. How are you going to get this? I believe they think that it's going to be hydrofracking, that they're going to supply the world with gas, right? And I think that's the main plan. I could be wrong, but I don't know anything else that the U.S. makes except military equipment and some cars and stuff that China can't make or these other countries rapidly can't make. We've even shipped out manufacturing aircraft to Japan. We've shipped them out technology. Well, how long do you think before the new airliners are going to be Chinese airliners, right? How long do you think China has double the natural gas that we do? Should they choose to frack, they can do it more cheaply, all right? If they make cars, you know, they can put out a good car for like $3,500. Which car are you going to buy if there's no tariffs? You're going to buy a Chinese car. We're going to go into the tank. We built China, you know, to a large degree. We owe them now because that's the way we're paying them. It's depressing. All right?
So it's more complicated than this.
Yeah. So our current U.S. debt is $18 trillion, and you can see that $5.6 trillion is a big chunk of that. Right? It's a big chunk of that. And it doesn't end at $5.6 trillion because had that money stayed in America, there's a multiplier effect that it gets spent and respent and respent. It's more like $10 trillion. It's more like the major factor in our deficit, and nobody talks about it. They don't want to talk about it because they're invested in these companies. The multinational companies have less of American identity now than they got international aspirations, you know. There's some of them who made so much money and they don't want to pay their taxes. They're holding off their taxes offshore to get a better tax rate. They want lower taxes. To me, that's un-American.
I just wanted to add that those revenues that they are holding offshore, I think are estimated at $23 trillion.
It could be, but they're calling the shots is what it is. And that's corporate control. There was a little exercise I was going to do, I'm going to do it in the future thing, is where you would write or call out if you had a bigger crowd. Items that you bought recently that weren't made in America. All right, now we all know that it's everything, but when you see it, you know, all your clothes, everything you use, your computers, blah, 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 blah. You realize that these are all the companies that made these items no longer exist. God bless you. No longer exist. They left the country. They either were big enough to leave the country and go take advantage of the low wages, right, and send products back, or they were small enough that they couldn't compete with that, and they closed their doors. So the manufacturing went out. So overall, we've lost like 8 million jobs in those 12 years, maybe 4 million manufacturing, but the other 4 million were support companies that supplied parts and commissary service, you name it. Okay, next. That's it? Oh, so free trade, really the free trade agreement, I never understood this because it sounded so good. Free trade! Oh, isn't that nice? Yes. No barriers, yes. But I never realized, and I think the people don't realize, that it's a wish list of the 1%ers. And the way they keep it a wish list is they keep it secret. Just the 1%ers meet in a room. What can we get rid of to make top-notch profits? Let's keep it secret. Let's do fast track, get it voted on fast. And then let's keep it secret for another 4 years. Even Americans can't read it if it passes as law. So this is what we're up against. I think Kian, who's Adam, you next?
Pete. Well,
Pete.
Pete's gonna go. I'm gonna. I guess.
Pete Dolack is going to say a few words next, and then Kian's going to wrap up.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks for that overview, Joe, and thank you, Ken. Ken certainly gave us a good background briefing on what's going with this, and Joe started to fill in on some of the details. I'm going to fill in some more details for everybody. One thing I actually want to follow up on this point with the trade deficit with China, because an interesting thing, apparently one of the reasons for the TPP, besides in addition to all the things that we've been talking about here, is actually aimed at China. It's an attempt to ice out China out of trading and get everybody else tied up to the U.S. So it's possible down the road they may try and get China into this, but I think short term I don't see that's happening because it's actually designed as an anti-China initiative. And indeed, it is just a wish list of the 1%. That's precisely what this is about. And of course the 1% have their control of the corporations. So let's back up a little bit, because I want to go back to the old issue of China and the trade deficit. So why did I interject? And it says, oh, but what's the number one entity? What's the number one entity that's the cause of these deficits with China and having production move to China? And it's Walmart. See, this is not some kind of conspiracy, and it's not, people sitting behind closed doors and rubbing their hands in glee. We always have the pictures of the guys in the top hats and the mustaches. Like, okay, what this is about is competition. Okay, this is about competition. Now, the corporate leaders who do this may well be evil people, if you want to call them evil. I'm the last one who's going to argue that point with them, but their personality doesn't really matter so much. This is about competition. Now, why do I stress that word? It's because, just as we said before, you're paying your workers $20 an hour in the US, or $25 an hour in Canada, say, and you can pay them $3 an hour in Mexico, and then you can pay them 75 cents an hour in China, and the next stop is Vietnam. Vietnam is the low-wage alternative to China, incidentally. And so you can pay them 40 cents an hour, or more like 40 cents a day in Vietnam. That's probably closer to it. What are you going to do? This is your profits. Because remember, the whole idea of with capitalist competition is not only do you have to have profits, you have to increase your profits. And if you don't do this, your competitor is going to do this, and he's going to put you out of business. So even if you're kind of a nice person, you don't really want to do this, well, that's where your profits are coming from. So you're going to do it. So once everybody starts going there, you're going to follow there. And the number one entity for doing this is China, is Walmart, because what Walmart does is they so squeeze their suppliers, they so push down the price that Walmart was willing to price. The only way they could supply Walmart and stay in business was to shift their production to someplace where the wages were super, super low. And that's China. And that's what's leading it. I mean, other companies are following on it, because once somebody does it and gets a competitive advantage to that and increases their profits, everybody says, hey, I got to get in on this, and they're going to go pile in. And once one company does it, the other companies in that industry. Once one industry does it, the other industry starts doing it, and they just start hopscotching around. And that's what these free trade agreements are all about. They're all about knocking down every barrier to profit making. Every barrier to the 1% getting more and more and more. And that's what this is all about. So if anyone, well, probably no one here shops in Walmart, I would imagine, but if you know someone who shops in Walmart and they complain, those Chinese are taking us for everything, why are we sending all our money there? You tell them, well, why are you shopping at Walmart? That's the number one entity. You're doing everything you can to encourage production to move to China when you shop at Walmart. So tell your friends that. Tell your friends that. That's what it's about. So how are they going to do this? It's interesting. You see, free trade agreement, but there's almost nothing about trade in it. It's all about rules and regulations and statutes and environmental standards. And it's all about, as Ken put very well earlier today, getting rid of them all. Getting rid of it all. It's all about if an environmental rule, a labor standard, a corporation can say, hey, if I have to adhere to that, that's going to cost me profits. And then they sue. So we're talking about, well, who do they sue? They don't file in Supreme Court down on Pearl Street. They don't file in the federal court. They go to one of these tribunals. There's 3 of them running around. There's the London Court of Arbitration. There's a couple others there, and what they do is the arbitration bodies are secret tribunals, literally secret. This is not hyperbole. And what they do is the governments who are signatories to these deals appoint people to it. Now, the United States has appointed 8 people to the body that oversees the hearings to NAFTA, or probably this is the one that they would use for the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Every one of them is a corporate lawyer whose career is dedicated to defending corporations in these kind of tribunals. So they bring the cases, and then they also sit in judgment of this. Literally, this is the case. There's no one is allowed to sit in on it. Often they don't even tell you when it is, and then they just hand down the decision. So all the decisions, virtually every one of them, is always in favor of the corporations. Well, no wonder. It's their own lawyers who are handing down these decisions. Because a country is a signatory to these agreements, this has the force of a foreign treaty, i.e. it is now part of your national law. So that's why they can do this. So there's no appeal to this. That's it. It actually supersedes your own law to it. And the way that they do it is you can't sue your own government, you can only sue another government within that. So the way they get around that is they just put a subsidiary. One of these agreements is between Australia and Hong Kong. And Australia has very strong rules against smoking, stronger than we do in this country. Philip Morris didn't like that. But they wanted to stop that, but they couldn't. So what they did is they transferred some of their assets to Hong Kong and says, look, we're a Hong Kong country. We have a subsidiary there, and then now on that basis went and sued. In fact, the case that Ken mentioned before, the fracking in Quebec province, was a Canadian company. Well, they can't sue the Canadian government, so they set up their headquarters are in Canada, but they're headquartered in Delaware, which is the United States' own offshore tax haven. And what that means is basically you have a post office box in Wilmington. That's what it means when you're a Delaware corporation. That's all it means. But because they have that post office box in Delaware, they are now a United States corporation, and they could now sue Canada, even though they're a Canadian thing, because the ban on fracking hurt their profits. That's all they wanted to do. They literally wanted to frack under the St. Lawrence River, the main waterway for the whole country of Canada. That's great. So that's what this is. That's what it's all about, and this is the mechanisms that they do it. So any rule or regulation will be illegal. The highest duty of every government will be to maximization of corporate profits, regardless of costs to people, labor, environment, safety, health, anything. That's it. Period. End of story. That is what we're fighting. That is what the Trans-Pacific Partnership. You think NAFTA is good? If you like NAFTA, you will love the Trans-Pacific Partnership, because NAFTA is the starting point. It's the starting point for this. They're going there and they're going way beyond it. And anyone who is an investor will be eligible to sue. There's no restrictions on who an investor is. Anybody who's thinking about making an investment in something, you're an investor, and you'll now be eligible to sue and say, hey, What do you mean? I can't dump my toxic waste into the water supply? That would cost my profits. To do that, you'll be able to sue. And that's what all this is about. So,
Okay, hello everybody. My name is Kian Frederick. I'm the New York State Director for the Citizens Trade Campaign. And we're a coalition of labor and faith, community, activist groups, environmental groups, all the good people. And we work together with everybody else, and certainly Move On. We're happy to be working with Move on issues related to trade. And obviously the TPP is a big one, and I work directly under the direction of Public Citizen Global Trade Watch, and they're sort of the beating heart of the TPP fast track fight. But before I move into what fast track is and all that, I just want to give you a few little statistics here. There are currently 29 chapters in the TPP that we know about, right? And how we know is because they've been leaked by negotiators from other countries. In our country, there's under the executive branch of the president, there's something called the U.S. Trade Representative. And their job is to go and to negotiate trade deals on our behalf. Our U.S. Trade Representative has refused, under the direction of the president, and this, in fairness, started under George Bush, this Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiations, and then Obama adopted it. And even though he ran on, well, we should renegotiate NAFTA, he ran on fast track is bad and we need to replace it. That's not what we're seeing now. And I voted for the president, and I'm a supporter of his on many other levels, but certainly not when it comes to this. You are wrong, sir. Simple as that. So they've been keeping everything secret. So what we know is from leaked documents. So we know that there are 29 chapters. And of those chapters, 5 are related to traditional trade issues. Tariffs, how many cars you send us, how many widgets we send you, how much you're going to tax, all that stuff. Normal things like that would be in a regular trade agreement. Only 5. 3 are administrative, right? And 3 are so super secret that we're not even allowed to know the names of the chapters. The remaining 18 are ones that make what are called exceptions. So what Peter was just talking about in terms of the fight with Australia and their tobacco labeling is a good example. And let's just hear this, because it's really where we're at as a country when it comes to trade. So currently, many people and other countries, and certainly Australia, is saying that we need an exception in this chapter because we have taken a position in our country that we don't about labeling cigarettes to kids, right? We put them in brown paper bags and whatever else we do. Now that is considered a trade barrier. It would be, well, under NAFTA it is, and that's why they're getting sued. And so they want an exception under this to say, well, wait a minute, it's not considered a trade barrier, right? So you can no longer sue us under this new trade agreement. The U.S. is fighting that. The U.S. is saying, the U.S. Trade Representative, Obama's guy over there, is saying, well, no, we don't want to, because, it's enforcement, and we want to make sure that we have equal free trade. So when they talk about equal free trade and balances, these are the details, the gory little details, mind-numbing, your eyes glaze over-ing details of what they're talking about. And another example in terms of exceptions that they're putting in are things about patents for generic drugs, was mentioned earlier. So the Big Pharma is seeking to extend their patents for 120 years. So what currently happens is, we're always fighting over this in this country, and I think you know what I'm talking about because you just went, whoa, and it's true. So in this country, right, you go to the pharmacist and your doctor gives you a prescription and you can say, I want generic. And if your doctor checks it's okay to give you generic, it's a lot cheaper, right? Well, you get that because I'm a drug company and well, the story is, okay, whether, I mean, it's all government funded, but allegedly I spent all the time and all the money and all the research and invested, took the risk to bring this drug to market. And so I therefore get to be the exclusive seller of it for a period of time so that I can recoup my profits. So that's why non-generic drugs are so expensive, because theoretically we're supposed to be paying the company back for all of its investment. That is another story as well. But when that patent expires after 20 years or whatever it is, I think it's about 20 years now. Is it 20? Yeah.
20.
So then that becomes part of other companies can make that drug by a different name, but it's called the generic brand of, right? And that's why we have generic drugs. So if you take those same patents and go from 20 years to 120 years, access to medicines for you and me will shoot up. If you're a senior citizen, if you're someone, for example, if you're HIV positive, or you have any kind of condition that requires you to take a lot of medication, you can only imagine how much the cost of your medication is going to completely shoot up. And that's here in this country, where we have fairly good access and ability to get medication, give or take. Forget about it in developing countries. I mean, people in other countries, especially in African countries where AIDS is rampant, access to those medications, so many people, they've done studies, and it's literally millions and millions and millions of people will die from this one little exception for big pharma, and they call them exceptions, but I really call them enumerated rights. Because it's as if it's not as if the whole TPP is some good idea, and we're going to have these little exceptions. No, the whole TPP is a bad idea, and it's not a trade agreement, it's a corporate rights agreement. And what these things they're calling exceptions really do is clarify even further. So just so nobody's confused, right, that we're going to especially say that tobacco companies have the right to sell to children. We're going to especially say that Big Pharma has the right to extend their patents out and deny folks access to medicines. And then the last exception I wanted to mention was the Stop Online Privacy Act, SOPA on steroids. And this was alluded to earlier. This is the internet thing. And so the best place to go for that is the Electronic Freedom Foundation, EFF.org. I'm not an expert on it because it has all to do with intellectual property and everything. Basically, what it would mean for our daily lives is that if you download any kind of academic material, if you download any kind of clip art picture to make a flyer, certainly if you have teenagers, and they download music, or then that would become something that would be much more expensive, but even just access to it. Your internet provider, Time Warner or Comcast or whatever you have, would be required to be like a cop, standing over your shoulder, watching every last little thing, required under this agreement for corporations to be watching every little thing you download. So we were shocked by the NSA. This is even worse than that. So I just wanted to give you that little bit. So it is a corporate rights agreement, and some folks wonder, well, if this is so horrible, how come I haven't heard about it? Well, you haven't heard about it on purpose, because there's two ways that they get these things through. One is keeping the whole thing secret, and then people like all of us, good folks, come along and try and tell good people like you about it, and you think, right? Which is certainly what I first thought when I started hearing all about this stuff. I mean, when they started talking about the investor state thing, which is what everybody was talking about, how you sue, right? So our government would be saying that foreign corporations are equal to the government, and they can go into the WTO, go into these UN tribunals that are secret, that are run by, they have corporate lawyers as judges, and then they rotate out after, I think, 3 months, a couple months, and turn around and then they're representing the corporation. I kid you not. And when she started telling me this, I just thought, ugh. This just is America, right? This doesn't, what are you, crazy? But really, It's true. And the most shocking thing is that we would be saying, as I think Pete or someone said earlier, that a foreign corporation is equal to an American corporation. So we would be giving up our sovereignty, and let's think about that. So let's take fracking in New York State and the ban. We currently have a ban, right? Not a law, a ban.
No, we don't have a ban.
We don't have a ban.
No,
We have
they're just not doing it.
oh, they're just not, okay.
Cuomo's waiting for us to go away, but we haven't.
Okay, thank you. So whatever we got, they're not doing it, and that's good for now, right? Thank you very much. Say we do get Cuomo, we get our state legislature to pass a very strong ban on fracking. You cannot frack in New York State. A foreign corporation could come in and take New York State to court under one of these, if this thing passes, and take us to the WTO, and you and I would be on the train, go to work, we'd have no idea, you know, and they're up there fighting about this, and they would be suing us because they would say that our law, our state law, the citizens of New York, is a trade, they would file a trade sanction against the United States government because our Congress and our president gave up our right as a state to have that law. And they said that, because what the TPP does is it says that all of the laws in all of these areas have to be equal, which means our food safety has to be the same. I mean, no disrespect to Vietnam, I have no idea, but their shrimp has got problems, right? So if we don't want to eat their shrimp and we want to tax it to make it right, we can't do that. And they would be able to sue in these courts, and when they win, which they usually do, where do you think their money comes from? Our taxpayer dollars. So it's this wild thing, raising the minimum wage. Anything else on a municipal, federal, state, or federal level, including our Supreme Court decisions. Now you really think I'm crazy, right? You know? But it's true. It's absolutely true, because it just happened, as I think Ken, we were talking about, right? In Canada, right? Where Eli Lilly is sued, and because they didn't like the patent decision that a Canadian court passed. So they said, you know what, okay, we lost, we didn't get the decision we wanted, so you know what, I'll tell you what we're gonna do, ha ha ha, we're gonna, forget about your little stupid courts and your democracy and your government, that's all nonsense. What we're gonna do is we're gonna go to these tribunals where it's much more favorable. So that's what we're up against, and that's what we're facing. The good news is we can stop it, and you think, well, okay. Yes, we can. Now, we're gonna switch gears from all this horrible stuff. And remember I said there's two ways that they get these things through. The first is they keep everything secret. And the second is they cheat and use tricky little ways to pass it through the legislature. And so currently, and that's called fast track. And it's also, now they renamed it Trade Promotion Authority. And there's a little bit of it in the news now because they're trying to get this passed by the end of the year. And it's one of those things that unless you're looking for it, you know, it's a real inside the DC ball game kind of thing. You or I would never pick up our newspaper and read about this because it is really this odd procedural thing. And it is extra constitutional, if you will, in that it wasn't originally part of the Constitution. Article 1, Section 8, which is the part that says what Congress is supposed to do, our elected representatives, your Joe Crowley or Meeks or whoever it is empowered to regulate trade with foreign nations. And that worked for about 200 years, right? When we had a trade agreement, right, then Congress would the executive branch would send somebody to go talk about it, then they'd come back and Congress would go over it to, word by word, it would go through all the different committees and everything, and then they would vote yes or no. But the final legislation went through the regular process. In the 1970s, Richard Nixon, of all people, Tricky Dick, remember him? So he came up with this idea to have something called fast track. And he said, guys in Congress, I know you're busy and this trade stuff is complicated, here's what we'll do. Why don't you give me the authority to go negotiate the whole thing, and I'll just take care of everything, then I'll come back and I'll give you an agreement, And you guys, you don't have to worry about having hearings and all this other stuff. You can just vote yes or no on the whole agreement that I give back to you, and you can't change anything, you can't amend anything, it's yes or no, right? And so when that agreement comes back, we'll make sure that all the talking heads on TV and everybody else goes running around talking about jobs, 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 and that's how this stuff gets passed. That's how NAFTA got passed. That's how all the other bad trade agreements got passed. I mean, we need to remember that NAFTA, we were promised 200,000 new jobs a year, per year. We've lost 700,000 jobs to Mexico under NAFTA, right? The same thing with Peru. We were promised 700,000 new jobs. We've lost 40,000. I'm sorry, 70,000, we lost 40,000. So these things never ever lead up to their billing. So that's what we're gonna hear if we sit around and let this whole thing get fast-tracked. So, the fight right now isn't really over the TPP, because there is no vote on the TPP coming up. They're still negotiating this thing, and they say they're gonna end by the end of the year. No, they're not. It'll be next year that the TPP gets finalized and all the different countries agree, and Australia, I guess the new government over there is going to give up on their tobacco thing or whatever happens, right? So they all agree on the thing. So that's not happening until next year. But right now, there's a vote that has to happen before this whole TPP thing, and that is whether or not Congress is going to, again, give up its right to the president, give up and not do its job and be lazy in my view, right? So there's going to be a fast-track vote. Now, it might seem, you're looking at me like, huh? Yeah, that's right. They're being asked to vote blind. They're being asked to say, give us the authority to negotiate something that we're keeping secret and not telling you anything about, right? But do that anyway, trust us, and then we'll bring you back the final deal. So, what we've been doing, and so we want, obviously, for everybody to vote no on fast track. And it's a very simple thing. Maybe eventually you're going to vote yes on the TPP, right? Maybe eventually. We're not asking you, Mr. Representative, Ms. Representative, to take a position on the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We're simply asking you to do your job, as the Constitution says, to choose the founding fathers, those old fogies I know, over Tricky Dick's system, right? And to examine every piece of this trade deal. Because that's your job, that's what the Constitution says you're supposed to do. I'm not confused about that. All of this other stuff, yeah. I'm not confused about what my Constitution says you're supposed to do. And you know, as well as I know, that once we drag this horrendous thing out into the light, and everybody sees the details, it will be shredded. It will never get through in its current state. And that's why the president wants fast track. That's why a lot of people want fast track, because they know it is the only way. It is the Achilles heel, and it is the only way to stop the TPP, is to drag it out into the light by making it go through the regular constitutional process. And let's be clear, since Tricky Dick came up with fast track in the 1970s, over 200 trade agreements have been negotiated the good old-fashioned way. Only 16 have been fast-tracked. So this is a rarely used process, and it's used for bad trade agreements. It's used for too big trade agreements. And what does that sound like? These barriers are too big to fail, too complicated. We just have to put up with it. So nobody goes to jail for what they did, and nobody, right? I mean, this is the kind of stuff that they're telling you, well, it's too confusing, you can't, it's too big. No, it's not too big, right? It's very simple. It's Article 1, Section 8, do your job. Look at this whole thing. Down the road, you want to vote yes or no on the TPP, we'll talk about that. But so that's the fight now. In New York State, we have done very, very well in getting all of our members of Congress in the House of Representatives, which is where we think we can win this fight. We don't think we can win it in the Senate. I don't know where Schumer and Gillibrand are on this. I think Schumer's pro fast track, I'm not sure. But we haven't really been concentrating on that because we don't think the votes are there for us to win. But in the House, we absolutely think the votes are there for us to win. In New York State, yeah.
Can you let us know who is on board, who among the Congress?
Yeah, that's what, yeah. So, no, it's okay, yeah. So in New York State, we're very proud to say that we have a bipartisan majority of the New York State congressional delegation publicly opposed to fast track. And that means that they have signed on to a letter to the president sponsored by someone from their own party. So on the Republican side, and I really want to give thanks to Adam for doing this good work, we have 2 of the 6. 4 left. Yeah, 2 of the 6 Republicans signed on to their letter, sponsored by, of all people, Bachmann, Michelle Bachmann. Isn't that weird? Strange bedfellows. I know, yeah. Well, it's just because the president wants it, so they don't want to, But it is Congress giving up to the executive branch, right? And believe me, if this was all of these same all of these people, if this was Bush, it would be the other way around, right? We'd have no problem because they denied it to Bush, right? When the Democrats held the House. So, but we also have every other Democrat in New York State signed on, upstate, in the city, to the letter from Rosa DeLauro. We call it the DeLauro letter, if you hear that lingo, because she's a representative from Connecticut, very good friend to labor, environmentalists, all good things. And so we have everybody except 3. One is Charlie Rangel, surprisingly, but yeah. But he does say that he won't sign on to this letter for whatever reason, but he will vote against fast track, so we need to stay on him about that. And actually, we are in the home of the other 2, Crowley and Meeks. Meeks, of all people, is sadly not only pro-fast track and pro-TPP, he is one of the leaders of this in the House of Representatives. He is on the TPP caucus, which is the group of House members who are supposed to run around and schmooze their colleagues and tell them, oh, come on, get your name off that letter and vote this way anyway. So that's distressing. And then here we are in Crowley's district. And is this?
We're in Maloney's.
Oh, we're in Maloney's too. Okay, Carolyn Maloney is signed on. Absolutely, she was. We took her about a month to get her to sign on. Is that right?
Something like about a month.
About a month. Yeah, you're leading up that effort, Pete. Yeah, and then I know you're a constituent as well, right? So proudly, Carolyn Maloney is on, and so we're glad about that and thankful to her. Crowley and Meeks are the 2 in this area, and we met with Crowley. Representative Crowley, and he's a nice enough guy. I mean, I'll have a beer with him any day. That good old Irish Blarney. I could say that I'm Irish, name like Kian. But the fact of the matter is, he's going to vote against us, right? And he said, well, there has to be some system. The only thing that I think, and others can, but is that piqued his interest was this business about access to medicines. Because he's done some work on orphan diseases and things like that. So anybody that's in his district should certainly call him, but we should be realistic about what we think how we think we're gonna move him. And what I would like to do, and it's certainly worthy of discussion, and maybe with a larger group, obviously, because we've just begun to organize in this area here, right? Not in Maloney's district, but obviously in the Queens, Meeks, and Crowley district. Because we didn't think they would sign, so we spent a lot of time on people that we, wanted to get first. So we've just begun here. So please don't feel the smaller group. We were sort of expecting that. So thank you all. You're the leaders, the vanguard. So we don't expect them to sign, but we certainly shouldn't give them a free ride. You know what I mean? And we certainly can kind of, neutralize them a little bit by stirring up, a little interest and some folks calling and saying, hey, this is really wrong. This is wrong. Because we're not asking you to take a position on the TPP. We're asking you simply to do your job, and especially considering all the secrecy. And everybody knows. Congress is mad. They know they're wrong. And they're angry, or rather they should be, about how they have been completely disrespected over this. Representative Alan Grayson in Florida a couple months ago pounded for months, was one of the first ones to be able to see any of the TPP. And now, they came in, they only brought 3 chapters, and they had to unplug all his phones, Everyone had to leave his office, no staff, nothing. He had to have 2 people standing over, looking over his shoulder, right? And he's written about this. I mean, this is all a matter of public record. And he couldn't take any notes, take any pictures, make any copies, and he had to agree not to talk about it.
Who's that?
Alan Grayson in Florida, right? Now, fast forward to just a couple of nights ago, just this past week in DC, a group called the New Democrats, which is like a centrist, so they're pro-TPP, pro-fast track. So they said, don't worry, come on, we're going to tell you everything you need to know, don't worry, it's no problem. What did they do? They stood up there with the same old 3 chapters. They tried to peddle to Grayson, right, and say, oh no, see, this is really what it's about. But there's 29 chapters, and I'm supposed to vote on the whole thing. It's the same old 3 chapters, and, talked about whatever they talked about, and then they said, you're not allowed to talk about it. So, obviously, this is crazy. We're the American people. These are our representatives. They should be able to do their job, and we should, with the FTAA, everything was out there, and they learned their lesson, right? Because we mobilized and organized against it, But what is the big secret? We know the big secret. It's really bad. The only way to fight it is the Achilles heel, and that's to win the fast track vote.